Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's 10 a.m. We're going to get started with the second half of our morning presentations. I'd like to take a moment, remind everyone that this entire morning, along with the next one coming up next Tuesday, will be and are recorded in full, so you do not have to take detailed notes. We will have those session recordings posted to the mifb.org website. And since you are listening to this, you are logged in and watching live, then you will also receive an email with a link for that connection. Great thanks to our many sponsors that have made today possible. Without you, none of us would be here. During times of a worldwide pandemic, we have managed to pull off a Michigan Mass Timber Summit. I am sitting here in beautiful northern Michigan. I am in one of the best locations possible for viewing the fall colors. I can see orange and red leaves falling outside the window right now. It is a picture-perfect fall day in northern Michigan. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers for this next 60-minute session. As I introduce them, if they could turn on their cameras, that would be wonderful. First up, Mr. James Smith, Midwest Regional Manager for American Wood Council, and he is stationed in Wisconsin. Jim joined the American Wood Council staff in 2014 as the Midwest Regional Manager, who is a resource for code officials in 10 central and Midwestern states. Prior to joining American Wood Council, he was the Chief Building Inspector and Zoning Administrator for the city of Waukesha, Wisconsin for 3 years. Prior to that, he spent 32 years with the state of Wisconsin's Safety and Buildings Division, with the last 16 of those years as the program manager responsible for the Commercial Building Code program. Next up, Mr. Keith Lambert. Keith is the Director for the Bureau of Construction Codes for the state of Michigan. He has worked for the Bureau since 2003, serving as the Deputy Bureau Director from 2011 until 2016, and Director of the Office of Land Survey and Remonumentation from 2008 to 2011. Thankfully, I'm a forester, and remonumentation is not a word I'm unfamiliar with. That's a tough one this early in the morning. Before joining the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Bureau of Construction Codes, Keith worked for 8 years in the surveying and engineering industry with private sector firms and the Michigan Department of Transportation. In 2003, he obtained his professional surveyor license from the state of Michigan. Keith earned a Bachelor of Science in Surveying Engineering from Ferris State University in 1998 and graduated with an associate's degree in business administration from Delta College in 1994. Mr. Kevin Sehlmeyer, Michigan State Fire Marshal, Director of the Bureau of Fire Services. Kevin was appointed the Michigan State Fire Marshal in April of 2017. He heads the Bureau of Fire Services within the state of Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. He serves as an ex officio member of the Michigan Firefighters Training Council and State Fire Safety Board. Kevin also leads a statewide community risk reduction effort known as MI Prevention to make communities safer and reduce fire fatalities. Kevin has also been a director with the International Fire Marshals Association since 2018. Prior to his appointment as Michigan State Fire Marshal, he served as the Deputy Fire Chief of the Grand Rapids Fire Department, and after 30 plus years with the department, he retired in January 2016. Like many, he retired from one and went right to something else because he's unable to stay home quietly. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for turning your cameras on. Everyone except for Jim Smith is going to turn their cameras and mics off, and we are going to let Mr. Smith take it away, sir. It is over to you.
Okay, can you see my screen? Which screen? I guess check to see which screen you're seeing.
We're seeing the screen that looks like it's the presenter mode.
Okay, so let me get the, let me change the screen.
And this is where we remind all of our participants we are not the Olympics of webinar broadcasting, so sometimes we just need an extra minute.
Okay, let's see which screen I'm sharing. How's that?
Excellent, you are ready to go, sir.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks for having me this morning as I lead off this segment on building codes. I want to start out the segment by noting the current building code for Michigan. Since April 2017, the Michigan Building Code has been based off of the 2015 IBC. Mr. Lambert and Mr. Sehlmeyer will be providing you with more state-level information on their portions of this building code segment. Mass timber is a term being used to describe wood products and built-up assemblies having large dimensions and mass. This is a list of those elements and their acronyms, kind of like alphabet soup. As an example, we have CLT for cross-laminated timber and NLT for nail laminated timber. It's important to remember that in order for any of these products to be considered mass timber, all have to be massive enough to be in compliance with the minimum size requirements spelled out in the Chapter 6 of the Building Code. The next few slides will lightly touch on these various products. First on the list was sawn lumber, and when of large enough size, the elements are considered timbers. The National Design Specification, or NDS for short, breaks that down into two categories: beams and stringers for beam type applications and posts and timbers for column type applications. The NDS is a design guidance document published by the American Wood Council and referenced in the Building Code. The NDS provides guidance, references, and calculations for design professionals that are using wood as a structural framing material, and in this case, defines those categories. Section 4133 of the NDS tells us that beams and stringers is referring to lumber of rectangular cross-section, 5-inch nominal or more thickness, with the width more than 2 inches greater than the thickness and graded with respect to its strength in bending when loaded on the narrow face. Section 4.1.3.4 of the NDS tells us that posts and timbers is referring to lumber of square or approximately square cross-section, 5 inches by 5 inches nominal and larger, with the width not more than 2 inches greater than thickness and graded primarily for use as posts or columns carrying a longitudinal load. Next on the list is glue laminated timber, glue lam, the more common term, when used as a beam or column. When used as a panel like shown on the left diagram, glue laminated timber is referred to as GLT. The other photos show the size and scale of glue lam beams and columns, ranging from those that can be manhandled, if you will, into place to those larger beams or girders needing to span greater distances. Mechanically laminated decking, or as it's more commonly referred to as nail laminated timber, NLT, is not so much a product as it is a mass timber element that is typically made up of appropriately sized sawn lumber that is placed side to side and stitched together with nails. Mechanically laminated means we connect and transfer the load through a very specific and designed load path, which requires a specific fastener schedule to comply. The connecting can be done in the field, but to facilitate good quality control, that connecting is most often done on a factory floor that is out of the weather and often climate controlled. On the right is the Nail Laminated Timber Handbook, a really nice resource if you're looking for more detailed information on laminated timber. Dowel laminated timber, it's a newer product, not yet referenced from within the building codes. The collage on the upper left are a series of photos I took in September 2018 at the first new mass timber project in Iowa. When I say new, I mean that they've had history with mass timber buildings, older buildings being retrofitted, but to build one from the ground up was new and the first time in Iowa. The upper photo is a close-up of the dowel laminated timber slabs used for the floors and roof on the project. As with many newer products, the manufacturer decided to get an evaluation report that establishes its acceptability for use with the code and includes the details as to how it complies. Evaluation reports, as shown in the lower right on the slide, can help code officials approve products like this that are not referenced from within the building code. Here we have structural composite lumber. Structural composite lumber, or SCL, is a family of engineered wood products created by layering dried and graded wood veneers, wood strands, or wood flakes with waterproof adhesive into blocks of material known as billets. These billets are subsequently milled into specified sizes. Structural composite lumber is defined in the IBC and includes parallel strand lumber, laminated strand lumber, laminated veneer lumber, and oriented strand lumber. Next is CLT, or cross-laminated timber. A CLT panel might look similar to the GLT panel from an earlier slide, but in this case, the lumber laminations are provided in an odd number, with each lamination laid up 90 degrees to the previous lamination. The odd numbers for the panel is so the top and bottom laminations are running in the same direction. You will note that the similarities to that of plywood sheets, but instead of thin veneers running 90 degrees to one another, for CLT you have those layers on a much larger solid sawn lumber scale. As noted, as a note, CLT, as opposed to GLT panels or NLT panels, have a two-way strength axis to them. Remember that the strongest configuration is when the CLT panel is installed with its top and bottom laminations perpendicular to a bearing wall or supporting column and beam line below. Mass plywood panels, or MPP, are actually the newest on the block. They're manufactured using plywood sheets as the laminations to make up the large thicknesses required to be considered mass timber within the building code. This is a new product that would typically require acceptance by the code official as an alternate on a project until such time as MPP is referenced within the building code. For the next few slides, I'd like to touch on some of the significant changes regarding mass timber that have taken place in the newest editions of the building codes, starting with the current building code in Michigan. That's the 2015 IBC. The 2015 IBC has provisions to allow mass timber products in all types of construction, but 2015 is when the manufacturing standard and provisions specific to CLT were included. This slide is specific to the permitted uses for CLT. For types 1 and 2 construction, CLT can be used for roof elements or for balconies and canopies. For type 3 construction, CLT can be used for all interior building elements. For types 4 and 5 construction, CLT can be used for any of the building elements. This slide, we're now moving forward pretty quickly, but this slide, we're now moving up to the 2018 edition of the IBC. This slide is just a short list of what one might be considered to consider the significant changes related to mass timber that have taken place in the 2018 edition of the IBC. You'll note that I have included the code change number in parentheses for those that want to find out more details. We have all of that information available on our website for you. Note that I included in section 510.12 as the first, and it's a special occupancy pedestal provision allowing up to a 9-story CLT building of R1 or R2 use. In section 602.3, CLT is allowed for exterior walls of type 3 construction. Throughout section 602.4, SC elements were added in section 602.4. Provisions for the safe use of concealed spaces were added for type 4 construction. Also in section 602.4 is included the allowance for the use of GLT and SCL elements as a part of a CLT exterior wall when you're in type 4 construction. Here's a little bit more detail on one of the 2018 IBC significant changes. In the 2018 edition of the IBC, the minimum dimensions for heavy timber have been reorganized and moved from Chapter 6 to Chapter 23, the wood chapter, with no changes in the minimum size requirements. The familiar table shown here on the slide has always been known as Table 602.4, but by moving it becomes Table 2304.11. Now I'll step forward to the 2021 or newest edition of the IBC. The Tallwood Building Ad Hoc Committee found it necessary to develop a couple of new definitions for inclusion within Chapter 2 of the IBC. Those are mass timber. The definition for mass timber is based on the same minimum cross-section dimension as traditional heavy timber. Non-combustible protection. The non-combustible protection is needed as a definition to provide the enhanced fire resistance and safety to align with 2 of the 3 new types of construction that were added to the 2021 edition of the IBC. Speaking of those construction types, the most significant, I think this is perhaps the most significant change to the IBC for quite some time. That took place with the creation of 3 new types of construction described here. The new types are designated as types 4A, 4B, and 4C. The old heavy timber is redesignated type 4HT. But type 4A has to have all the combustible mass timber elements covered with the aforementioned non-combustible protection. The protection amounts to 2/3 of the element's fire resistance rating. Type 4B requires the same 2/3 of non-combustible protection, but allows a small portion of the mass timber elements to be exposed. Type 4C allows almost all of the building elements to be exposed, but does require 2 hours of fire resistance for all of the mass timber elements. Here's the updated IBC Table 601 showing the new columns for the 3 new types of construction. If you look closely, you will notice that the fire resistance rating requirements for type 4A are exactly the same as the fire resistance ratings as those required for type 1A construction. When you look at both 4B and 4C, you will see that they have exactly the same fire resistance ratings as those found for type 1B construction in the table. These are the new columns in table 504.3, which specifies allowable heights in feet. For clarity, I'm showing only one row from out of the table. Note that the heights in feet are commensurate with the construction types with similar ratings, except type 4A does not get the unlimited height, or UL in the table, the way type 1A does. I will explain that on the next slide, but the TWB committee used the same procedure to establish these heights as they did to establish the story limits. You might also notice that the unsprinklered limits are capped at those corresponding to the existing limits for type 5, the limits in height for type 4-HT. Here's an excerpt from the table 504.4, which specifies the allowable heights and stories for the 3 new types of construction. Notice that the unsprinklered height limits for any occupancy is equivalent to the existing code height permitted for heavy timber. The TWB codes work group started by first establishing a relationship between types 1A and 4A. Then they went to types 1B and 4B, and lastly, the type 4C limits were set as being equal to the existing height limits for type 4HT. Then after all the numbers were plugged into the tables, the TWB committee examined each cell for efficacy and reason, and then adjustments were made accordingly. Areas could not be correlated to the unlimited, or UL in the table, the unlimited allowance for most of the types 1A and 1B occupancies. And accordingly, the committee started with the old type 4HT, or type 4, areas and increased those by the following factors. For type 4C, the lowest type of construction, the type 4 values were multiplied by a factor of 1.25. For type 4B, the old type 4 values were multiplied by a factor of 2. And for type 4A, the highest or most, which is going to get the tallest sizes associated with that type of construction, the type 4 values were multiplied by a factor of 3. After the number crunching was done, the values were further adjusted downward based on recognized risk factors. What I've done here is this slide provides for a summary for the new type 4A. And with that, what I'm going to do is I'll just kind of read from the slide. And each of the next couple of slides are going to be in the same format. So the maximum height is 270 feet. Number of stories ranges from 9 to 18. Now that doesn't include the high hazard or H categories. The mass timber is fully protected, so there's none exposed. All are sprinklered when you get into these tall sizes. The primary frame has a 3-hour fire resistance rating. The floor slabs have 2-hour fire resistance rating. The non-combustible protection that I referred to earlier is 120 minutes for the primary frame, which is the 2/3. The stair towers are non-combustible. Concealed spaces are okay if protected in accordance with the code requirements. And floor topping in this case is non-combustible construction. For this slide is for type 4B. And again, we've scaled down a little bit. Maximum height is at 180 feet. The number of stories is between 6 and 12, depending upon occupancy. The exposed mass timber is it's partially exposed, very small portion. Sprinklered, yes. Primary frame is 2 hours. Floor slabs and roof slabs, 2 hours. The protection from non-combustible protection to get to that 2/3 is 80 minutes. Stair towers are permitted in this to be a protected mass timber, and it's okay if protected the concealed spaces. Floor topping is again non-combustible. For type 4C, you can see that the maximum height is dropped down to 85 feet. Numbers of stories ranges from 4 to 9, again depending upon occupancy. Exposed mass timber is fully exposed when you're in type 4C. Building of these sizes are sprinkled. You've got a 2-hour frame, 2-hour floors and roofs for the slabs. The protected mass timber is permitted for the stair tower. Fire resistant protection from non-combustible protection. Again, there is no protection required. It's okay if the concealed spaces are protected. Again, the requirement is if they're meeting the concealed space requirements for these 3 new types of construction. And floor topping is not required. A non-combustible floor topping is not required. In this case, what I have for you is an example that for all of these new, first I want to say, remember for all of these new construction types, sprinklers are required to get to these sizes. I don't want to emphasize that enough, but sprinklers are a significant need in all types of tall buildings, whether you're dealing with buildings of mass timber or whether you're dealing with tall towers of non-combustible construction. So to get to those sizes, you've got to be sprinklered. No combustibles are permitted on the outside of exterior walls or within concealed spaces. This last slide for the 2021 IBC comparatively illustrates the heights and areas permitted for the Group B or business occupancy. That's the occupancy which allows the tallest buildings. The heights are the same for the residential Group R occupancies, with the exception that type 4C is limited to 8 stories instead of 9. So if you look at the type 4A, you've got tallest maximum height, 18 stories and 270 feet. The allowable area is 972,000 square feet per the building. The average square feet per story is 54,000 square feet if equally divided between the stories. 4B had dropped down to 12 stories and 180 feet. 648,000 is the allowable area for the building, and the average square feet per story is 54,000 square feet if equally divided between stories. In type 4C, 9 stories is the maximum height and 85 feet. 405,000 square feet is the allowable area per building, and that averages out to 45,000 square feet if equally divided between stories. Sorry for my slipping of the tongue. Type 4 HT, which is the old type 4, is at the 6-story, 85 foot, and 324,000 square feet of allowable area per building, and average of 54,000 square feet if equally divided between the stories. For the last couple of slides, I wanted to show you some examples of buildings that were built of and being built using the alternative means provisions of the code. That's the provision that's provided in section 104.11 of the IBC, and it's for anything that's alternative, an alternative. This is a project, Carbon 12 project, located in Portland, Oregon. It was topped out in May of 2017 and completed in 2018. Carbon 12 is a residential tower that is 8 stories tall. Last but not least in these examples, this is the Ascent project, located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it's a 25-story that is 284 feet in height. The project includes 259 residential units. The building itself is scheduled for completion in the summer of 2022, and the architect is Jason Korb of Korb & Associates. Mr. Korb indicates to me that delivery of the mass timber elements are slated to begin in the May of 2021. And I think I'm pretty close to staying on track for time. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Jim, you did wonderful. You're actually ahead of schedule, so thank you so much. I have a tendency to talk fast. I must not be the only one here this morning that talks a little bit fast.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And this is a reminder to everyone that's listening to please submit your questions into the chat box. And we did have a little bit of a blip this morning. We missed a couple of questions by one of our participants, and we're going to make sure that we're keeping track of those. So Jim, if you want to go ahead and shut your camera off, and we are going to switch over. Keith Lambert, you are up next. So if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on, we'll get you ready to go. Good morning.
Good morning, Brenda.
Excellent. We can hear you just fine.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shut myself off. Please remember, everyone that's listening, you can submit your questions into the chat box. We will keep an eye on those. We will have a question and answer session when our third speaker is finished. That Q&A should start somewhere around 10:45. And Keith, you have a few extra minutes built in, so don't feel that you have to rush.
Okay, can you see my PowerPoint right now, Brenda?
We can see that.
Okay, great. I'll try and cover a few extra minutes if I got time here. So,
Alrighty.
So first off, wanted to get into just an overview of as far as statutory authority on what's underneath the Bureau of Construction Codes here, and talk a little bit about the current codes that we have in place and the codes that are being processed. Right now, Michigan is under the 2015 building code. We're working towards getting the 2018 building code, knowing that ICC is starting to publish the 2021 codes. So again, we kind of take them in order, so you'll see that in the additional slides after this. And get into our administrative rules, the current and proposed. I kind of separated codes from administrative rules, just semantics based on how we talk about it in Michigan. Codes in general are the skilled trades in nature as far as the construction code. The administrative rules are more authoritarian for licensing standards in Michigan, which we'll get into. Then I'll get into the code rule promulgation process that we have here at the Bureau, and you'll see as far as the Administrative Procedures Act, which dictates that process, the involvement at the APA level, plus some additional stuff that we put in here at the Bureau. And I certainly want to be able to get people involved, so I'll show you how you can get involved. And lastly, I'll want to talk about jurisdictional authority in general. A lot of people think that the Bureau, has authority for all construction in Michigan. That's not the case. We do have the authority to promulgate the codes, but as far as enforcing them are typically at the local level. So the statutory authority for codes and administrative rules in Michigan, you will see we have a number of statutes here going back to 1956, the Electrical Administrative Act. But we also have some other acts that are sprinkled in here. For instance, the Ski Area Safety Act, the utilization of public facilities by physically limited, that's barrier-free design issues. The Carnival Amusement Safety Act, Elevator Safety Board, and then we get into some, land survey specific as far as surveyors, the Land Division Act, Corn Recordation Act. But what I really wanted to emphasize here was the Still Dorset Hale Single State Construction Code Act. And that was adopted by the state in 1972. And it's going to deal with not only the Michigan Building Code, but the Electrical Code, Plumbing Code, Mechanical Code, Rehab Code, Residential Code, Energy Code. All of that authority is given to the state under that act. So that's the overencompassing act that gives the authority for many, if not all, of the construction codes here in Michigan. All right, the additional statutory authorities, we go down the list, you'll see that we have a number of them. Forbes Mechanical Contractors Act, Building Officials and Inspectors Registration Act, so they have a separate carve-out basically as far as the registration of those building officials in Michigan. Some other acts that we have, the Mobile Home Commission Act, clearly that's a little bit different than the building codes. Those are all constructed to HUD standards, but they're brought into Michigan and we license the parks in Michigan. And then we get into more surveying related, the State Plumbing Act and the Skilled Trades Regulation Act. That's the latest one. In 2016, it became effective in 2017, and that's going to knock out a number of these licensing acts that you've seen above, like the State Plumbing Act. So, current codes that are in effect in Michigan, we have a number of them basically, and I wanted to cover that. So you'll kind of go, if we go to the first one, which talks about the Construction Code Part 11, pre-manufactured units, that was adopted in 1984, the last time there was any changes done. As you'll see, there's no national standards for those pre-manufactured units, although I know the building code is relied upon for those pre-manufactured units, but again, that hasn't had a change since 1984. And then you go into the Carnival and Amusement General Rules Act. They have the ASTM standards as well as another one. And then you get into the other various trades as well. You'll see ASME, NBIC. Basically, you're seeing all of them, but the majority that we're going to talk about right here is down here, the Building Code, the Rehabilitation Code, Energy Code, Mechanical Code, Plumbing Code, and Electrical Code. Those are all from the ICC except for the Electrical Code, which is the NFPA. And you'll see that we refer them in Michigan as different parts. Part 4 all the way up to Part 11, basically. So these are the codes that are in effect in Michigan. And the codes that are currently up for adoption, as you'll see, we're on the 2015 Michigan Residential Code. That's the Part 5. We do have that up for current adoption, but we've only opened up chapters 1 and 2. As far as that, Michigan Elevator Safety Rules, we have those open. Those are going to the 2016, hopefully. The Ski Area Safety Rules are going to the 2017. The Building Code, again, 2018 we're trying to get to, as well as the Mechanical Code and the Plumbing Code. And the Boiler Code is going to go to the 2019. Now, with that said, the way Michigan operates, we're in a current legislative session that ends at the end of this calendar year. If these that are open don't get adopted, then we have to start over from scratch. So that we're hopeful they all get adopted in this current session. So administrative rules that are in effect. Real quick here, we have the barrier-free design rules that started in 1988. We got the boiler rules, building official inspectors, electrical administrative board general rules, elevators. These are all rules, meaning licensing statutory authority, not construction code necessarily. And additionally, here's the other ones that talk about. Now you'll notice that the Part 1, 2, and 3 general rules are part of the codes, but in general, they're the administrative enforcement of those, as you will see. And then you get into the other ones. The one I wanted to focus on was the Skilled Trades Regulation Rules, which talks about licensing for all plumbers, electricians, mechanical contractors. So when we get those rules adopted, the other ones will be repealed, as was seen previously. Administrative rules currently open. You'll see that we do have a number of rules that are open as well. mainly the Skilled Trade Regulation Act, which will knock out the rules I just talked about, which is the plumbing, the electrical, and the mechanical. So as far as the process map goes, I wanted to show you the process that we go over as far as the Bureau. And you'll see that initially we have to do a RFR, which is a request for rulemaking. And once that's done, we start going through our process of notifying the applicable board, emailing licensees and stakeholders, and then we give them that notice that they're going to provide us with any proposals, and we're going to log all those proposals basically, and basically come up with a draft of what the new code would be in Michigan. And then we do have a public advisory meeting down here where we take additional input after we create that draft to see what people have as far as suggestions and changes possibly. And then once that's done, we revise the draft rules and finalize the regulatory impact statement. So then we can start going through the APA process, which is holding a public hearing, having a public hearing, and listening to all those comments as well, and then finally taking that to the JCAR, which is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules in Michigan here. And if they give the blessing, then we actually get to send it to the Secretary of State for them to publish that. Let's see here, let me shrink that down. And the pending rule activity, I just wanted to kind of show you an overview of when you click on this, what you will see. Hopefully it loads up here. So when you click on that, this is where we're at for the building code. So you will see that you have your RFR that you'll be able to click on, the draft rule language, the regulatory impact statement form, and the notice of public hearing. So we're well along in getting that done this year, so we're looking forward to that. Next up is, so part of our code and rule promulgation process, just so you know if you want to get involved, is we have a form out there which basically talks about the justification for code and rule changes. And there's 10 things here basically to ask about how is this going to have an impact in Michigan. And these 10 were the most significant that we saw out of actually the 36 that the APA requires us to do as an agency here in Michigan. So what this does is this helps us to make a change in Michigan if we're going to possibly alter the national code or possibly delete part of that national code. So it's the rationale that's involved to make it pertinent to Michigan here. All right, so how do you get involved? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to be aware of the administrative rules and codes. So I got a link here basically that when you click on it, it shows you this is our webpage here for the Bureau, even though we're under the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, which is the department that oversees us, but we have our administrative rules right here that'll show you where the rules are, and then you have the codes and the public acts as far as the statutory authority goes. So that's the web page you will link to if you want to have an awareness. Now the next thing would be is if you want to subscribe to a specific rule set when it's opened, and I'm going to show you the language you'll have here. So when they get opened, we publish on our website what ones are open. And as you will see, if you want to necessarily join the ski regulation rules, then you can do subscribe as far as that goes, and the subject line with ski regulation. So you'll be notified of everything in the process of where it's at as we go through that promulgation process of those ski regulations rules. So it gives you the ability to track and get involved in the process with the Bureau. And of course, you click on that email there and it'll get you to subscribe. Or in the alternative, you can actually sign up for more than just the rules. You can sign up for a number of notices as far as licensing goes. We have a trades connection that we have here in Michigan that we send out too. So if you get to this one, this is the department where it's email subscriber, where you can actually set up how you want to be communicated with the Bureau as far as that goes. And let's see here. So just kind of a little bit of an overview of the Construction Code Act. It kind of shows who can submit documents here in Michigan, and also what those construction documents entail. Again, this is more or less in line with the codes. It talks about the engineering detail and all the trades that are involved. Building code, I think we're all familiar with what the building code is. Are building permits necessary? Certainly they are. When they submit those, they're going to submit plans with the permit, and it's going to go to the appropriate enforcing agency. So I wanted to get a little bit involved as far as who's the enforcing agency in Michigan so everybody has an understanding. So there's a jurisdictional authority layout for the Bureau, which is provided. If you go to the Bureau's website, this is going to be the main page of the Bureau where it says Welcome to BCC. And when you scroll down all the way to the bottom, statewide jurisdiction list, if I click on here, this is going to show the statewide jurisdiction list in Michigan. Let me zoom in a little bit here. And so it's either going to be at the county, local, or state level. And I'm just going to scroll down here real quick to the first page to kind of show you an overview of, for Alcona County, as you'll notice, they have a county program. There's no state or local involvement, but you can see that it's possible you could have a building being under one entity, maybe local, electrical under another one being the state, and the rest being the county. So it is pertinent that the contractors in Michigan pay attention to the authority as to where they submit those. And I kind of went over that right here. So you have the enforcing agency at county, local, or state issued, and then you have a county building department, city, township, or village building department. The state would be the Bureau of here, of course, and it can be fragmented is what I'll call it, between the building, electrical, and mechanical, and plumbing. Another list that we do keep as well is the school construction enforcement list. That is different than the jurisdictional list, so this is specific to school construction buildings in Michigan. And what you'll see is the ones that have elected to have it, and it's based on a fiscal year here in Michigan, goes from October 1 to September 30th. And it's the ones that choose to have a construction authority for schools in Michigan. By default, the Bureau is the one that oversees them, but if they have the applicable standards to get that, they can apply for it and get it on a yearly basis. The Bureau does cover 90% of the schools here in Michigan for construction. And the last thing I wanted to make you aware of is the FAQs for online submissions to the Bureau of Construction Codes. When you click on this, it gives you a link, and it shows how you can create a building permit here, as well as submitting plan reviews in Michigan. And with that, my presentation is done.
Thank you very much, Keith. A lot of content, short span of time. We appreciate your ability to give us the best synopsis you possibly could. If
Sure.
you want to go ahead and close off your screen, and we will bring on our third speaker, which is Mr. Kevin Sehlmeyer. Thank you, sir. We see you on the screen. Do you have a presentation for us, sir? Oh, you are muted, I do believe, Kevin.
Thanks, Brenda. I do have a couple slides I'd like to share.
There we go. All right, I will go ahead and turn my camera off, and I'll let you take it away, and you will see me come back on when we are giving you about a minute to wrap up.
All right, so everyone should be able to see my slides. I have a few slides here. Keith Lambert, we both work for License and Regulatory Affairs within the state. So Keith gave you a good overview of how the building code is the different levels that are throughout the state. Probably the biggest one that I want to share with you from the fire code side is the authority within the state of Michigan. And realize that I know there's a lot of folks that are tuning in internationally and across the country on this webinar. So one of the things that you'll find in many states is that the state will have a fire code adoption. It's usually through the same process Keith outlined, and we'll have administrative rules. Under the Bureau of Fire Services, since I know a lot of folks are tuning in here from Michigan, the Bureau of Fire Services has jurisdictions in schools, hospitals, nursing homes, home for the aged, and adult foster care. The reason I bring that up, we are using the NFPA. I want to take the STEM building at MSU. We applied the NFPA Life Safety Code 1001, the 2012 edition. So as Keith shared, a lot of all of our fire code updates are statutorily, it's a process that is gone through. in order for the code to be updated, and we're currently using the 2012 code. So the building that you've been hearing a lot about at MSU was using the 2012 code. As you venture outside of the list that I gave you, that the Bureau of Fire Services has for fire code, it's going to go to the local fire department. And so there again, as Keith shared, it's always good to check with the local fire department in the area where you're looking to put up a building in conjunction with the building department, so that you can work through what addition of code. In Michigan, a lot of fire departments, some are using the NFPA fire code and others are using the International Fire Code. So those are definitely things that you'd want to check. A couple things that I wanted to bring up, and this is building off of what I heard last week as we were talking about how the building was put together, the STEM building here in Michigan. That building, remember I shared we're using NFPA 1001, 2012 edition, and this aligns with rules that are coming from Public Act 207 of 1941 here in Michigan with amendments. One of the things that in talking with our plan reviewers and prepping and to be ready to speak today, that the building that's being built at MSU is using type 3, it's ordinary construction. Jim Smith did a really great job of explaining type 4, heavy timber. One of the reasons why type 4 wasn't applied to the building here in Michigan that we've been talking about the last two sessions of the webinar is because of the fact that we are using the NFPA 1001 Life Safety Code 2012 edition, and of course then we have to follow along. So with that being said, ordinary construction type 3 is what was being applied. Some of the things that Jim shared, which I think are important, is when you start looking at the ratings of how you bring the different components in, and this will be very prevalent as we move forward, get into the 21 code. I'm glad that Jim's bringing that up. Things are definitely changing. There's a whole lot more that is going to change, and that a lot of these components are going to be able to be used in building. And that's one of the things that Keith and I try to do here in our state, and I know it's being done at the national level, is how do we as the state agencies with the fire authority or the building authority, how do we interact with the local communities so that the communities and the state can interact with the different builders that are going to come to Michigan or potentially across the country to build these buildings, to make sure that they are put together. Jim, I think you made it very clear in there that all of these buildings, as we move into the type 4s, the A, B, C, and the HT, moving forward as the codes evolve, all require them to be sprinkled. And I'll provide my contact information. Brenda, I think that takes us into, we'd like to go into a panel discussion, and we can open it up for questions. And thanks for the opportunity to just briefly talk about Public Act 207 of 1941, which is part of the Michigan Fire Code. And hopefully we provided information that will help contractors and architects and the building community build these buildings as safe as we can make them, and to meet the codes.
Thank you so much, Kevin. We would like you to stay on the screen. We will bring our other two speakers up on the screen. So if Jim Smith and Keith Lambert, excellent. Man, everybody's just Johnny on the spot today. This is wonderful. So we do have some questions coming in from the chat box, and we want to make sure we remind everyone, because the content here in this last session has been very in-depth and very specific. Please remember, those of you that are listening, that all of this is recorded. You can replay it. If you need someone's specific contact information, you'll be able to obtain that. All right, so let me pull up, and we have one question here. I'll start off with this one for you, Kevin. Why did MSU have to use type 3 again and 2012 fire code?
Well, in working with our staff, and because it comes to plan review first, it came down to using the life safety code, the 2012 version. And I realized that, Jim and Keith both have talked about being at the 15, talked about the 18, and we're looking to evolve into the 21 code. For schools, for instructional facilities is how it falls into our rules. And Keith covered that rules process. Ordinary construction, type 3, was the best fit using the life safety code that we use for approving the plans.
Hey, thank you. I'm not sure who the best person is to answer this. It's probably either going to be Jim Smith or Keith Lambert. I guess I'll tee it up for Jim first, and if it's not him and he wants to pass the buck over to Keith, he can do that. The question is,
I'm glad to always pass.
oh goodness. So the question is, who is taking the lead in coordinating support for mass timber related to building codes? Michigan Tech, Michigan State, Michigan DNR, anyone else? That question comes in from Larry Liefers, who is well known to many of us here in our forestry circles.
I think just from my being asked to participate in this, you can remember we had last year, right there at Michigan State, we had a little forum or a little summit where we talked about this to try to bring forward the interest to the folks in Michigan. And I think a lot of the sponsors that you have going here, whether it be Michigan DNR, whether it be the different timber producers, that's where the driver is going to be for moving forward with this type of thing. It's not about the codes. The codes, as Keith has identified, Kevin's identified, that's a fairly standardized process, whether you're at the national level, whether you're at the NFPA level. What Kevin just brought up, the types of construction, they're a little bit different when you're dealing with the NFPA codes. I sit on several NFPA technical committees, and one of the things that we had to do to try to start, bringing mass timber forward is we had to propose changes, and they've been worked through for the latest editions. Again, 2021 editions. 2021 compared to 2012. They've incorporated some of the provisions to make the NFPA requirements a little bit closer in alignment to those that are going to be in the 2021 editions of the code. So the types of construction, you're going to have those variables to allow taller mass timber buildings in NFPA where they currently don't exist. So you've got to work through all of those different levels.
Did you have anything you needed to add to that, Keith?
I think Jim hit it on the head. Jim and I got together probably about 3 years ago when there was a forestry conference here in Michigan with Mark Rudnicki putting it on, and I think that started the ball rolling as to why you see this Mass Timber Summit now. But yeah, you're right. We need to get the codes adopted here in Michigan, and then the next line is to educate the architects and the engineers to be able to design it. And then once the design starts taking place and construction starts happening, that's when you educate the inspectors in Michigan. So it's kind of like a evolving process, just like the codes are.
Thank you. Question for Keith. Can you please repeat the timeline for adoption of the next IBC version? What version will that be, and when are we projected to get 2021 IBC?
I knew that question was going to come, and basically, I don't have a crystal ball. If you go back and look at the presentation, you'll see that we still have the 2018 Energy Code and the 2018 Rehabilitation Code that we have to adopt. So certainly that's going to be our priorities for the next legislative session, because we got to get building, mechanical, and plumbing done. Hopefully this legislative session, then go into that one, and then we can start talking about the 2021, because if you go and leap, ICC doesn't do these leaps. I mean, they have to make sure that all the codes work together. There was one time in Michigan here when we jumped from a 2009 to a 2015, the residential code, and unfortunately that process, although nobody likes the lengthy process involved when you jump from one to the next and you're put under a deadline, there are lots of mistakes that happen when you jump a code cycle 6 years. So we don't intend to jump to the 2021 right away, but want to get all the 2018 done first before we jump into the 2021 as well. So.
Okay, thank you. And I do believe this question has been answered, but it was posed, so I'm going to make sure there's clarity here. Is Michigan operating under the 2015 or the 2018 code, and then followed up with when will the 2021 code be adopted?
Okay, that's a tricky question. So,
okay.
We are under the 2015 right now. When I say that, I'm talking about the codes in general. However, in the Construction Code Act, there's a carve-out that says for the residential code that once the residential code is adopted or published by ICC, which is published out there, then a builder has the ability to use both the 2015 and the 2018 as long as compliance is met for that. So there is the ability to go to a 2018 in residential, even though we're still on the 2015, but the residential is different because there's a choice of whether we go to a 3 or 6 year cycle. And we opened up we had a public meeting for the 2018 and we decided not to go to the 2018. So we're all on the 2015 and residential is going to stay there. That's another one we're going to have to adopt when the 2020 comes out. So we're on 2015, we're going to 2018.
Okay. We have another question coming in actually from George Berghorn, one of our prior speakers this morning. Could Michigan early adopt the tall wood provisions in 2021 as part of their 2018 adoption process as several other states have done? I'm not sure. I think, Keith, that one's for you.
Great question. Unfortunately, the way the statute and the APA is written, once you open up the code, you open up all of it, basically. So we don't get a choice of just taking a certain chapter or provision from a national standard and just adopting that portion. It's an all or nothing approach, basically.
Okay, excellent. I don't see any more questions coming through. Do any of the three of you have any parting words you'd like to share?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
We appreciate all three of you.
Brenda. Thank you for letting us be part of this. And,
yeah, thanks.
You know, I think we're all learning a lot too. So this has been a good webinar for everyone involved.
Yep.
We really appreciate all three of you participating along with all of our other speakers throughout this 3-session content webinar series. So we'll go ahead and say goodbye for now and feel free to continue to join us, everyone. If you gentlemen would like to please close off your webcams, we're